talking about stories. And of course, now some people might say, well, I'm a professional presenter. I don't do stories. And probably, even if you don't use stories right now, you probably should. And we have a legend from the industry, probably the most experienced expert we have in the speaking industry about stories. Hello and welcome, Doug Stevenson.
Thank you very much, Neil. It's good to be here.
Thank you very much for taking the time. We now met at numerous locations. I think Paris, Amsterdam, London, Washington, wherever we met. And you specialize in the story theater method. Let's just take it from a bit of a European point of view. And I think you have the same in the US. Some people will tell you, hey, Doc, maybe stories are useful, but, I'm a CFO, I'm an insurance agent. I don't use stories. I have data, numbers, and facts. Why should I use stories?
Well, here's what I say to everybody. Facts fade, data gets dumped, but stories stick. Most people who've given a presentation or attended a presentation walk away remembering the story. And if you understand what you're doing with story, if you use it strategically, if you craft it deliberately, and you deliver it and present it with energy and perhaps a little theatricality, the lesson, the message, the point of the story is what is remembered more than data, facts, figures, flowcharts, whatever. People don't remember bullet points. Bullet points anesthetize brain cells. Slides with lots of content, lots of bullet points, they're all very well and good. And of course, we need them. We need to convey content. We need to convey ideas. But when you have a specific idea and you think, well, what is the one thing I want my audience to remember after my presentation? Not 23 things. What is the one most important concept or premise? You need a story to get that across, because when you do it with story, it's visual, it's auditory, it's kinesthetic, it's heart, mind, soul. It does all of the it checks all the adult learning boxes. So story is memorable, and you need to learn how to do it well.
So when people are now in the business world, they might say, okay, you have a professional background in, I think when I remember correctly, you have a professional theater background.
That's correct. I was an actor for many, many, many years.
Excellent. So many people will now say, I am not an actor. I'm not made for this. I never did that. And also people might say, look, Doug, you have a very fascinating life. I don't have any stories. Nothing fascinating happens in my life. So what should I do?
Well, most of the people that I have coached over the last 20 years are not professional speakers. They're business professionals. They're in different organizations, everything from high tech to healthcare to manufacturing. And these are people who say, I'm not interested in being theatrical, but I do need to tell a story because I have a point that I want to get across. And so the theatricality of it is not important. What's important is the strategic design, the R&D of story. People don't come to me anymore saying, Doug, convince me that I need to tell a story. People now understand in business, I need to tell a story, but I don't know how to do it. Help me. And so I help them with the strategic choice of a story. And you don't have to have any profound experience. All you need to understand is the use of meaningful moments. I have a story that I tell that has become a signature story for me, a story that basically communicates the premise of everything I do. And it's simply a story about giving my sick dog a pill. Her name was Jaya. She got sick. I didn't know what to do. I took her to the vet. The vet said, yes, she's got a little doggy cold. I need you to give her these pills. Give her one at breakfast and give her one at dinner. And she explained to me how you give a dog a pill. So at 5:00 that night, I called my dog over. Jaya, come here, Jaya, come on. And she kind of came over to me really lethargic and everything. And I said, Jaya, I need to give you this pill. So I need to do what the doctor said to do. So I pried her mouth open and I took the pill and I shoved it way down into the back of her throat. And then I held her mouth closed because that's what the doctor told me to do. Well, I stared at her and she stared at me. And after about a minute, I thought, well, I guess she swallowed it. I can't really tell. I let go of her mouth. And what does she do? She spits it up. Now I got this half digested pill on my hand. It's yucky gooey. I did it again with a second pill. She spit it up again. I thought, this is not working. It was after hours. I couldn't call the vet because it would have cost me a fortune. I called my friend John, who has dogs. I said, John, what do I do? He says, do you have any peanut butter? And I said, what has that got to do with it? And he says, hide the pill in the peanut butter. Well, I did what he said. I got a scoop of peanut butter. I put it in the palm of my hand. I stuck the pill inside the peanut butter. I held it down to Jaya, and she lapped it up. And the pill went down with the peanut butter. And the lesson of this story is hide the pill in the peanut butter. Well, now that's a story about an interesting event, a meaningful moment in my life. But what does it have to do with business? You say as a CFO that you've got data, and that's what's important. Well, the data, the facts, your content that is dull, dry, and boring, that's the pill. It's hard for audiences to swallow. They can't digest it all because sometimes it's just too much or it's too technical, and they're not necessarily technical. So what do? You hide the data, the content, the charts and graphs. You hide some of that inside a story. The story's like the peanut butter because it's tasty and sticky. And so in business, you need to learn how to hide the pill, your data, in the story butter. Hide the pill in the peanut butter. Well, now that's a story about giving my dog a pill. It's not a big, profound moment in life, but it's a moment where I looked at it and I thought, that's interesting. That's kind of a metaphor for something. When people hear me tell that story, their revelation at the end is, well, hell, I've got stories like that. Yeah. I thought I had to have some big deal story. It's like, nope. Meaningful moments where something was interesting that happened. You encountered adversity of some kind, a challenge, a crisis, whatever. You figured out how to overcome that challenge. And in the overcoming of it, you learned a lesson. That's story theater, the strategic use of a meaningful moment crafted in a deliberate fashion. And I just told you that story over audio with no theatricality.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So how do you keep track? Because many people now will think, when I just live my usual life, how do I know when these moments happen? Because when you gave the pill, you probably did not have in mind first, oh, that's great stage material. I mean, maybe you had, because we know as professional speakers, we know that everything in life could be stage material. But when any business person is now just having a usual day in the office, a usual week, a usual month, how do they keep track of the good moments that could be used on stage later?
Well, that's an excellent question. And it's the rub for many, many people. So here's what I say. Start with the point or lesson in mind. You're approaching a presentation. You're about to give a presentation. You want to teach a lesson. You want to make a point. Now you go on a story safari to try and say, well, where did I learn the lesson that I want to teach? Because I believe in personal stories. I don't believe that you tell stories that you read in a book or that you heard from somebody else. You and I are most credible when we share lessons from our own life. And so I say, start with the point in mind. What lesson do you want to teach? Now you start looking through your life and say, okay, well, when I was 23, living in Chicago, do I have anything that teaches accountability? Okay, I can't remember anything when I was 23, about when I was 28, and I was living in that apartment on Melrose. Let's see, did I have, accountability. Yes, I had a moment in that time with a job that I had, and accountability. So you start searching through your life by going through different chapters of your life, looking for moments where you learned accountability, if that's the lesson you want to teach. Now, quite often, it can work the other way. Something interesting happens in your life. And eventually you look at that and go, you know what, that's an interesting metaphor for something that I want to teach. And that's how I started my professional speaking career. I had a theater exercise in 1974 in Los Angeles where I went streaking and got arrested naked as a part of a theater exercise. And immediately after going streaking, getting arrested naked, and waking up the next morning feeling like, oh my God, that was an amazingly weird experience. Is there a lesson there? Well, I thought it would be good stand-up comedy material. So I started telling that story at stand-up comedy clubs, but I didn't know how to tell it and I didn't know how to craft it. And so I didn't get any laughs. But 15 years later, I'd left acting. I was now in Colorado Springs. I was giving a speech. And in front of an audience, all of a sudden, they started telling my streaking story with full theatricality, running and screaming and jumping and hopping around and doing all my theater and improvisation. And people were laughing so hard that tears were coming down their faces. And I discovered not only the power of story, but how to tell a story, how to craft a story, how to put yourself into the story. Now, as I said, now I don't teach the theatricality to most people. I work completely on structure and strategy. What is the story? What is the point? Let's craft it. Let's write it. Let's structure it. Let's find the phrase that pays, the get out of the bus, or the hide the pill in the peanut butter phrase. I work on the strategy of it. But what I'm saying is sometimes something does happen. And you look at it and you think, now that was really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That could be something. Let's work on it. What would be the lesson?
Yeah.
And does the lesson fit the content that I'm about to deliver?
Yeah. Excellent. Now, you just mentioned something which is really important, which you taught me in Amsterdam when I took your workshop. And that is the phrase that pays, which really changed my approach to presenting. Could you give us a bit more detail? What is the phrase that pays and why is it so important?
Well, the phrase that pays is an adaptation from advertising. You will remember, get over it. Just do it.
Yeah.
Make your move. Advertising uses these call to action phrases all the time. They start with a verb. They're a call to action. They tell the listener or the audience what the advertiser, the product people want you to do. They, in speaking, summarize the lesson of your story with a catchy phrase. So when I just told you a story about giving my dog a pill, I snuck in that my friend John said, well, hide the pill in the peanut butter. That's a phrase that pays. Hide is the verb. Hide the what? Hide the pill in the peanut butter. So the pill in the peanut butter is the subject. Hide is the action. I also have a phrase from another story called look for the limo, where I flew in on the same day as a speech. I got there late. I almost missed the speech. There was no shuttle bus. There was no taxi. I looked at this guy with a limo. He said, sure, I can give you a ride. The other guy got canceled. I was just going to deadhead back. The lesson of that story is look for the limo. I'm sure you remember that phrase.
Absolutely.
Look for the limo is alliterative. There's 2 L's, but it's what I tell my audience to do. When things don't go according to your plan, look for the limo. In other words, look for the better solution, but you have to look for it. You can't just expect it to happen. You have to look for the limo being the better solution. And so a phrase that pays is a verb-oriented, short and sweet call to action statement that summarizes the lesson of your story with a catchy phrase.
Excellent. So when people are now listening to round this interview up, when they're now listening and they think, yes, I think I should use more stories. I think I really should implement that in my style of presentation. But the question is, where do I actually start? To round this interview up, what are Doug Stevenson's top 3 tips when people want to get into using more stories to be a more engaging presenter?
Well, if you're not a natural storyteller, if this isn't the way that you think, then you probably need some help. You need a coach. You need somebody who thinks story and understands story and crafts story. I mean, I would go to an accountant to do my taxes. I wouldn't do those myself because somebody who's an accountant is a specialist in accounting. If I were to want to learn how to go skiing, I would go to a ski instructor. Well, this is what I do all day long. I sit here and I help people think story, craft story, challenge their stories, help them structure the stories. And more often than not, I help them find their phrase that pays. And then they go out and they give a speech, and it's the speech of their life because it's a high value speech. It's not just any speech. This one is a really important speech in front of an important audience. So the first thing I say is get a coach, and I'm willing to do that. I help people virtually all the time. The second thing you can do is you can buy my book. It's called Doug Stevenson's Story Theater Method.
Highly recommended, because I just have to jump in here because I read that book and it really changed my whole approach to presenting. So that is highly recommended from my own experience. And maybe you don't even know maybe you know that it's available in German, but do you know how much the German version now sells for in the US because it's in such high demand? Do you know the price at the moment?
No, I do not.
When you go on Amazon.com and you want to have the German version in the US, it's $88.97. So you see how high the demand is when you make a book in the US go for $90 a piece.
That's pretty darn good. I'm really glad to hear that. I didn't know that. That's
sorry,
a great...
I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Well, no, that's it. And there's, there's resources on my website, but you don't have to use me as a coach. I mean, there are coaches all over the place. The problem is, Niels, is when I started teaching storytelling in business 25 years ago, I was one of a handful of people doing it because that was before the wave of storytelling as the strategic business skill hit. Now, if you go onto Google and you search storytelling coach, there will be over 1 million people that come up. Well, how do you find your way through all that? That's the challenge. And so I think, yes, you need to find somebody who can help you with this, somebody who coaches people on story, and they're in every country, they're all over the world, but you need some help. You need some guidance. So my book, I can help you with it. And there's also a resource on my website called the Dynamite Speech System. And it is a 10 audio CD with a fill in the blank, follow along home study course workbook that helps you to understand the form and structure of a dynamite professional level keynote speech. So those are a couple of resources.
Excellent. I think these are the perfect final words for this podcast. We see here that storytelling becomes increasingly important. We know that in the US, they were way ahead of Europe, but now we all know that data alone and all those flowcharts and graphics will not sell what you want to sell to an audience. So it is important that you become knowledgeable about that. So at the end of this podcast, there's only one thing for me left to say. Doug, thank you very much for your time.